In 1692, a small town in New England became the scene of mass hysteria, religious fear, and deadly accusations. Amid superstitions and personal vendettas, one of the darkest episodes in colonial history unfolded. Today, we talk about the Salem witch trials. The year is 1692, in a small Puritan village in Massachusetts called Salem Village, now Danvers. One of the most disturbing episodes in American colonial history unfolds, the Salem witch trial. In just a few months, paranoia took hold of the community. More than 200 people were accused, 19 were hanged, 1 was crushed to death, and several died in prison. Salem became an eternal example of how fanaticism, ignorance, and collective fear can destroy justice and reason. The story began in January 1692 at the home of Pastor Samuel Parris. His daughter Betty Parris, at the age of 9 years old, and his niece Abigail Williams, of 11 years old, began to exhibit strange behavior, such as violent convulsions, uncontrollable screaming, crawling on the floor as if possessed, and claiming to feel bites and pinches from invisible hands. Soon, other girls were infected too, like Ann Putnam Jr., Elizabeth Hubbard, Mercy Lewis, and Mary Walcott. The phenomenon spread like wildfire. Local doctors, unable to find a physical explanation, gave a terrifying verdict. It was witchcraft. In a deeply religious community, where everything unexplained was attributed to the devil, this conclusion was enough to spark panic. If you like the stories I draw and tell, subscribe to my channel. And don't let the algorithm burn me at the stake like the Salem witches. To understand what happened in 1692, we must ask ourselves, what did witchcraft really mean at that time? The idea of witchcraft in Salem was a direct legacy from Europe. During the 16th and 17th centuries, the continent experienced major witch hunts. It was believed that witches were people, almost women, who had made a pact with the devil and participated in nighttime covens, sacrifices, and sorcery. Books such as Malleus Maleficarum and King James I's Demonology reinforced these ideas. The Puritans brought this view with them. For them, witchcraft was the clearest manifestation of the devil on earth. In America, these ideas were mixed with fears of the unknown. The colonialists watched with horror the shamanic practices of the native peoples, visions, rituals, and spiritual healings. For the Puritans, this was not religion, but devilish magic. Something similar happened with African and Caribbean slaves, who maintained their own spiritual beliefs. In Salem, the slave Tituba was central to the accusations. She was said to tell stories of spirits and supernatural animals to the girls. Although these were probably just stories, in a community predisposed to fear, they were interpreted as proof of contact with the devil. While in Europe some nobles practiced alchemy or astrology, in New England Puritanism was categorical. Anything that did not come from the Bible was satanic. In Salem, there were no real witches or secret circles. Witchcraft was a label used to mark those who were different, uncomfortable, or marginalized. In conclusion, in 1692, being a witch did not mean a practice in real magic, but rather becoming a scapegoat for the fears of a rigid and isolated society. It was an accusation that could cost someone their life. When the authorities asked the girls who was tormenting them, the names quickly emerged, like Tituba, Pastor Paris's Caribbean slave, knowledgeable about Afro-Caribbean legends and superstitions. Also, Sarah Good, a beggar who went from house to house asking for food and was seen as a nuisance. Sarah Osborne, an elderly woman who had scandalized the community by marrying a servant and attempting to claim land that did not belong to her. The three women had something in common. They were social outcasts, with little defense in a court dominated by Puritans. At the trial, Tituba confessed, probably under torture, that she had had contact with the devil. She claimed to have seen a tall man dressed in black, accompanied by cats, wolves, and other demonic animals. Her confession was key. Not only did it confirm suspicions, but it also suggested that there were more witches in Salem, fueling the witch hunt. In May 1692, the Court of the Oyer and Terminer was created, a special court responsible for dealing with cases of witchcraft. The judicial rules were terrible, such as spectral evidence was accepted, that is, visions or dreams in which the spirit of an accused person appeared tormenting the victim. Even if no one else could see it, it was sufficient as evidence. Also, the accused could not have defense attorneys. The pressure to confess was brutal. Those who confessed could save their lives, although they remained in prison, while those who defended their innocence were executed. The first to be executed was Bridget Bishop on June 10, 1692. She was known for dressing flashily in red corsets and for running a tavern. Her lifestyle did not fit in with strict Puritanism, and that made her an easy target. After her, 18 more people were hanged on Gallows Hill. If you want, you can tell me in the comments what other topics or stories you would like me to research and draw. More historical mysteries, myths, or perhaps a character that no one dares to talk about. I'll take note about your thoughts. The figures are shocking. 19 people were hanged, 14 women and 5 men. Giles Corey, an 81-year-old man, refused to plead guilty or innocent so that his land would not be confiscated. As punishment, he was subject to the torture of the forte et dure. He was crushed with large stones for 3 days until he died. His last words, according to reports, were "more weights." Between 5 and 7 people died in prison due to poor conditions, hunger, cold, and disease. Even animals were executed. At least one dog was hanged for collaborating with the devil. In total, about 200 people were accused of witchcraft, which meant that almost the entire community was involved, either as a victim, accuser, or defendant. To understand why Salem reached this extreme, we must look beyond the girls and the visions. Religious fanaticism. The Puritans lived in constant fear of sin. They firmly believed that the devil could walk among them and tempt anyone. Economic conflicts. Salem village was agriculture and poor, while Salem town was a rich and modern commercial center. Many accusations arose in the town, and the victims were often from the wealthier sector. Personal tensions. All grudges, disputes over land, and inheritance were resolved through accusations of witchcraft. If you wanted to get rid of a neighbor, all you had to do was point the finger at them. War and external fear. During those years, the colonies suffered attacks from native tribes allied with the French on the border. Reports of massacres and violence increased paranoia and the feeling of being besieged by evil. In this breeding ground, the girls of Salem became the trigger for a bomb that was already primed. The hysteria reached its peak in the fall of 1692. Accusations began to spread even to prominent figures, such as the wife of Governor William Phips. That was the last straw. The governor dissolved the court of Oyer and Terminer in October and released the prisoners who were still awaiting trial. By 1693, the trials had officially ended, and religious leaders began to acknowledge that a mistake had been made. Some judges publicly apologized. Over the years, the colonies tried to repair the damage. In 1711, the Massachusetts court declared the victims innocent and offered financial compensation to their families. In 1957, more than 2 centuries later, the state of Massachusetts formally apologized for what had happened. Today, Salem has become a tourist destination associated with mystery, the occult, and Halloween, but also a symbol of the dangers of trial without evidence and of collective fanatism. The story inspired writers and artists. The most famous example is The Crucible by Arthur Miller, premiered in 1953, which used Salem as a metaphor to criticize the political persecution of McCarthyism during the Cold War. The tragedy of Salem was not in witches or spells, but in the hearts of those who let fear dictate justice. A small town, divided and terrified, became the executioner of its own neighbors, and the question still lingers. Could something like this happen again today, with different names and different enemies?